If I told you that just 3 weeks after my husband died, my only son sold the entire family legacy to a stranger, would you believe me? Grace Miller hadn't spoken those words to anyone. Still, they kept echoing in her mind, louder than the lingering toll of the church bells after the funeral. The town of Redwood Springs seemed to slow to a crawl on the day they laid John Miller to rest. The entire Redwood Hawks baseball team stood in black uniforms, lined up beside a coffin draped in white flowers. Beneath the pale late March sun, the bowed heads of the men looked like statues, stiff with the effort of holding back their grief. Grace stood beside Ethan, her son. He wore a gray suit and a red tie, the Hawks' color. But she noticed his hand was cold, not from the breeze. A kind of cold that comes when someone is holding on to a heavy decision. The funeral had barely ended when Ethan called her to the team's office. Not to share memories of his father, not to talk about the will, but to announce what he called good news. Mom, SilverStrike Sports just closed the deal. They're buying the Hawks for $15 million. Grace blinked, thinking she must have misheard. Ethan said, his voice quick, like he was presenting a winning contract. They're moving the team to Las Vegas to join the professional minor league system. This is the step Dad always dreamed of. It's just he never had the resources to make it happen. She didn't interrupt, only stared into her son's eyes, the same eyes that had once made her believe he would carry on his father's legacy with heart and loyalty. And me? She asked softly. You'll get $5,000 to help cover some logistical costs. You know you don't have any official shares. That was when Grace understood. Ethan wasn't just selling the team. He was selling the soul of the town. The news spread faster than she imagined. That afternoon, the front page of the Redwood Times screamed in red letters, "Hawks to fly out of Redwood?" Fans shared it everywhere. A Facebook group called Save Our Hawks sprang up, gathering over 2,000 members overnight. Someone hung a banner outside the stadium. Selling the Hawks is betrayal. Grace read it all in silence. She didn't rush to react. A woman who had spent her life with John Miller, player, coach, and eventually team owner, knew that victory never came from the first swing. 3 days later, head coach Frank Delgado knocked on her door. "I know Ethan's your son, but John wouldn't forgive me if I didn't bring this to you." Frank laid an envelope on the table. Inside was a copy of a contract transferring the Hawks' image rights to an EMV Holdings company. The owner? Ethan Miller. Why would he do that? Grace asked. Frank shrugged. Maybe to pocket money from sponsorships. Maybe it will make SilverStrike pay extra for the rights. Either way, it's bleeding the team dry. That night, Grace sat alone in her husband's study. The scent of leather from an old baseball glove still lingered. She opened a drawer and pulled out a blue folder, something she and John had set up 6 months earlier. Pinewood Sports Group. John had told her, if the day comes when someone tries to turn the Hawks into a commodity, use this. She had never imagined that someone would be her son. The next day, Derek Vaughn, a town council member and close friend of Ethan, announced he would vote to sell the Redwood Stadium to SilverStrike. His reasoning: a shopping center project will bring more economic benefit than an AA-level baseball team. Grace knew better than ever. The Hawks would have no home to return to if they lost the stadium. She needed a plan. And she needed it now. "Ethan, you have no idea you've just started a game your mother has no intention of losing." Frank was right. Ethan wasn't just selling the team, he was stripping it for parts, dismantling every piece of value and selling it off like an old car, cashing in on each component. MV Holdings might have sounded harmless, but Grace knew it was nothing more than a shell company, an empty facade meant to hide the real transaction. In the sports world, it was an old dirty trick. Carve out the image rights, logos, and sponsorship contracts from the team, pocket the benefits, and force the new owner to pay extra for the complete package. What she didn't yet understand was why Ethan needed so much money. A few days later, she found out. An article in the Redwood Times reported that Ethan had just put a deposit down on a penthouse in Las Vegas, preparing for his new life running the Hawks in a professional environment. The photo alongside showed him on a balcony, champagne in hand, the Vegas skyline blazing behind him, as if he had already severed every tie to Redwood Springs. Grace didn't blame the community for their anger, but understood why some still sided with Ethan. The Times painted him as the devoted son, fulfilling his father's dream. Younger people in town thought moving the Hawks to a bigger league would be cool. A tourism magnet. They didn't realize that once the team left, it would never return. This town had lost a basketball team once, and 2 decades later, all it had to show for it was an empty warehouse. Meanwhile, Derek Vaughn was on the local radio, championing the sale of the Redwood Stadium to SilverStrike. He spoke of hundreds of new jobs, tax revenue, and a shopping center that would turn this town into a modern destination. Every word Derek spoke seemed designed to blur the Hawks' history into irrelevance. Grace knew that if the council voted to sell, the Hawks' long-term lease would be nullified and SilverStrike would have the right to move the team anywhere they pleased. Ethan would sign off without hesitation. She reached out to an old friend of John's, Martin Reyes, a sports lawyer in San Diego. Martin thumbed through the Pinewood Sports Group file she had brought. John was thinking ahead, he said. This fund was set up to buy back the team if the Heritage Protection Clause was violated. The problem is, who decides if that clause has been violated? No one but the court. Grace leaned back in her chair. If we wait for the court, the council will vote first. Martin nodded. Unless we find a way to repurchase the team right now, before SilverStrike takes full control. SilverStrike's in financial trouble, Grace remembered. They lost a big sponsorship last month, I read about it. Martin smiled. Then we make an offer for ownership. If they need quick cash, they might sell. And if Ethan finds out? He'll find out on the day it's too late to stop it. Grace felt her pulse quicken with hope for the first time since the funeral. She didn't know if this plan would work, but she knew one thing. It was the only swing she had left. 3 days later, when Derek Vaughn announced the council's voting date, Grace already had a plane ticket to Las Vegas in her hand. The flight to Las Vegas was delayed nearly an hour because of high winds over Nevada. When she landed, Grace didn't head to a hotel. She went straight to the offices of SilverStrike Sports. The building sat on a quiet street, its gleaming silver logo out front belying the strangely empty halls inside. The receptionist smiled, but when she heard Grace ask for the chief financial officer, that smile froze. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Grace replied, "but I'm certain he'll want to see me today." Half an hour later, she was sitting across from a middle-aged man named Carl Benson, his face drawn as if he hadn't slept in days. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She placed a certified check on the table. "I represent an investment group prepared to buy the Redwood Hawks from SilverStrike immediately. Our offer is $15.5 million, payable within 3 days." Carl looked at her as if she had just offered to buy the entire Nevada desert. "You realize we bought the team from Ethan Miller less than 2 weeks ago? Why would you?" "I know," Grace cut in. "I also know your company lost the Titan sportswear contract, and 3 major sponsors are pulling out. This money could keep SilverStrike alive for at least another season." Carl exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "You want to keep the team in Redwood Springs." "That's right. And I'm not here to haggle. But this offer expires Friday." He didn't answer immediately, but she could see the calculation in his eyes, and the weariness of a man tired of playing high-risk games. Walking out of that office, she wasn't sure she had won, but at least she had forced the prey into thinking about the trap. Back in Redwood Springs, the air grew more charged by the day. On Main Street, Harris's grocery store had a sign reading "No sales to Hawks traders." Everyone knew who it meant. Across the street at the coffee shop, a group of college kids debated excitedly about how moving the team to Las Vegas would put Redwood on the map. The latest Redwood Times article ran a photo of Ethan at a charity event in Vegas with Derek Vaughn, under the headline, "The man bringing the Hawks into a new era." Frank found Grace in the stadium parking lot. "They're splitting people apart. We're about to lose everything." Grace looked at the field, the faded roof of the stands, the worn wooden seats, and thought of those summer nights when cheers rolled like waves through the crowd. She didn't tell Frank about the buyback offer, only said, "Don't skip this weekend's game. We need to remind people the Hawks are still here." That night Martin called. "SilverStrike's in. They'll sign on Thursday. We'll close 1 day before the council vote." Grace closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. She knew this was only halftime, and the second half would be harder. Because once Ethan found out, he wouldn't stay on the sidelines. Thursday morning, a light rain fell over Redwood Springs, the kind that deepened the red brick of the stadium. In Martin's San Diego law office, Grace signed her name across a thick stack of documents, each stroke of the pen like driving another nail into the door Ethan thought he had swung open to the future. Pinewood Sports Group was now the official owner of the Redwood Hawks. The paperwork had been notarized and uploaded to the Baseball League's registry. Martin closed the case file and gave her a faint smile. Now you just wait for the right moment to announce it. On the drive back, Grace tuned into the local radio. Derek Vaughn's voice filled the airwaves, brimming with zeal. The council will vote Friday night. This is a golden opportunity for Redwood Springs to step into a new era of growth. We need a shopping center, not an AA team draining stadium maintenance funds. Every word pressed harder into the public's mind the notion that the Hawks were nothing but a burden. She switched off the radio, her hands tightening around the steering wheel. She couldn't let this story have only one side. That evening, Grace called Frank and Harper Lee, the Hawks star player, to her house. They sat around the dining table, the warm light glinting off the worn wood. She told them plainly, "The Hawks no longer belong to SilverStrike. We just repurchased the team." Harper's eyes went wide, and Frank's smile broke like the first glimpse of sunlight after a long storm. "Why not announce it now?" Harper asked. "Because I want Ethan to hear it in the one place he thinks he's already won, the council chamber. When that happens, the public's reaction will be our strongest weapon." Frank nodded. "So Friday's game will be the debut?" "No," Grace shook her head. "The game will remind them what they'll lose if they vote to sell the stadium. But the real news will detonate that night." She glanced out the window where the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the lights. She pictured Ethan's face in her mind when he realized the board he had so carefully set had been flipped. And she knew this final swing had to be perfect, because even a hair's miss would mean the Hawks disappearing from Redwood Springs forever. Friday afternoon, Main Street in Redwood Springs was packed like a festival, though every face was tense. "Keep the Hawks home" signs blanketed the courthouse steps, while a few support development placards huddled along the curb. Grace stepped out of the car with Frank and Harper, clutching a slim case. The league's ownership confirmation, the transfer contract from SilverStrike to Pinewood Sports Group, and copies of EMV Holdings' commercial agreements. She walked straight into the council chamber, thick with the scent of damp raincoats and coffee. 5 council members sat behind the wooden dais, the chair in the center, Derek Vaughn on the right with a tight, confident smile. Ethan occupied the front row, adjusting his cufflinks like a man well accustomed to winning. Public comments opened with familiar voices. The diner owner recalling packed Friday nights, the mechanic talking about the extra shifts the stadium gave him, a little girl clutching a baseball begging them not to move the team because, "Next year Daddy promised to take me to my first game." The room swelled with emotion until Derek rose, his voice smooth as a keynote pitch. He spoke of loving the Hawks but loving the future more, of the jobs, the steady tax base, the modern shopping center. "Redwood Springs can't live forever on nostalgia," he concluded, and polite bursts of applause came exactly where he wanted them. Ethan followed, polished and measured. His father had dreamed of the Hawks playing on a bigger stage. SilverStrike would make that happen. It was a chance for the team and the town. His gaze flicked toward Grace like a period at the end of a sentence. Frank took the microphone briefly. "The Hawks aren't just a payroll. They're an identity. Lose the team and we lose ourselves." Then he stepped aside for Grace. She walked to the podium, set down her case, and with one swift motion unlatched it. "I'm Grace Miller, wife of John Miller. I'm not here to ask but to inform you." She held up a sealed document. "As of last night, SilverStrike Sports no longer owns the Redwood Hawks. They have transferred full ownership to Pinewood Sports Group. This is the league's confirmation letter." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. Derek leaned toward the mic. "Who's behind Pinewood?" Grace met his eyes. "I am. My husband and I founded Pinewood to protect the team's legacy if anyone tried to turn the Hawks into a commodity." Ethan shifted forward in his seat but didn't speak. Grace went on. "These are the contracts between EMV Holdings and sponsors, the commercial revenue siphoned away from the team. Here are emails with SilverStrike about moving the logo elsewhere for a surcharge, and here is the excerpt from the Heritage Protection Clause in the will, requiring the Hawks to remain in Redwood unless both the teams' board which now has new ownership, and this council agree the community's greater interest is served. The chair signaled the clerk to take the copies. The room was quiet enough to hear the rain stop outside. Derek kept his smile. Even if you own the team, the council decides the stadium's fate. This development is a once-in-a-century opportunity. Grace's tone didn't waver. The Hawks have a 12-year lease with narrow termination terms. Ending it without cause opens the door to litigation and significant damages. But beyond the legal risk, consider this. Selling the stadium today erases a strand of this town's DNA. Harper stepped up beside her, speaking just one sentence. I was born here, grew up here, and every game means jobs and joy. If you take away the stadium, you take away the reason kids like me believe we belong. Outside, the crowd began chanting, "Keep the Hawks home," steady and loud. The chair turned to the legal counsel. Risk. The attorney stood calm. The litigation risk is substantial if the current lease is terminated without grounds. Derek tilted his head slightly, smile thinning. Ethan looked down at his shoes, then over at Grace, his face unreadable. The chair nodded, raised a hand. We vote on item 1. Early termination of the Redwood Stadium lease with the Hawks for commercial development. Hands went up, the clerk counted quickly, whispered, and the chair read aloud. Motion fails. The room erupted, applause, cheers, a few people in tears. The chair banged the gavel for order and moved to item 2. Freeze all stadium sale negotiations for 12 months to evaluate community impact and alternatives. Hands again count. Motion passes. Grace didn't smile. She rested her hand on the stack of papers, steadying her pulse. She packed her case and looked at the chair. Thank you for letting the truth be heard. Then she turned to the front row. Ethan, I invite you to Monday's team meeting to discuss operating plans during the transition. Her voice balanced courtesy with unmistakable authority, enough for everyone to feel the shift. Ethan looked up, his expression still polished, only his eyes hardening for half a second before he gave a small nod and said nothing. Whatever was left between them would be dealt with elsewhere. Derek scribbled something in his notebook, shut it, and avoided the cameras. Frank exhaled and brushed Harper's arm. Outside, the chant shifted to celebration. Few were listening by the time the chair moved on to routine business. The important part was decided. The Hawks were staying, the lease was intact, the stadium wasn't going anywhere, and the town had bought time to breathe. Grace left the podium as she had approached it, deliberate, sure-footed, without looking back. She knew she had said everything that needed saying here. The first battle was locked in, the power had shifted. What remained, her responsibility to the team, and the unfinished reckoning with her son, would be handled where it belonged. On the courthouse steps. Thank you, Mrs. Miller rang in her ears. Hands reached for hers and she saw a glimmer of John in many faces. Steady, forthright, putting the greater good ahead of self-interest. That night, Redwood Springs could go to bed with one simple, precious thought. Tomorrow they would still have a place to gather, still have Friday nights to shout themselves hoarse, and still have a team with Hawks across their chests. Monday morning, the small conference room overlooking the stadium was filled with familiar faces from Redwood Springs. The season ticket staff, media, logistics, Frank's assistants, a few local sponsors, and Ethan sitting in his usual spot at the front right. Grace took the center seat, set her case down, and swept the room to be sure every word would be heard. As of midnight today, Pinewood Sports Group has officially taken over all operations of the Redwood Hawks. All contracts, expenditures, and personnel decisions must now have written approval from ownership. She nodded to Martin, the attorney who handed out a temporary order. Freeze all agreements involving EMV holdings, restore the team's branding rights, void the old account signatories. IT was instructed to change system passwords and revoke administrative access cards. The air tightened as Grace turned to Ethan. Ethan, as of now, you are suspended from all executive authority, due to a conflict of interest and breach of fiduciary duty to the team's legacy. You have 2 options. She opened her case and placed 2 documents on the table, their headers bold and clear. Option 1. You resign as CEO today, fully cooperate in returning all intellectual property and commercial assets transferred without authorization, and consent to a forensic audit of EMV transactions. In return, the team will consider minimal severance. It will not refer the matter to criminal prosecution, unless the audit uncovers criminal fraud that cannot be ignored. She laid a hand on the second document. Option 2. You remain with the organization in a non-executive role, working full-time with the grounds and stadium operations crew for 26 weeks, paid-based technical scale, with no perks, reporting directly to the stadium operations manager. After that period, a 90-day transition committee, myself, Martin and Frank's technical representative, will assess whether you've earned enough trust for an operational position, with no return to executive control this season. Ethan raised his eyebrows, trying to sound calm. You want to turn me into a groundskeeper to get revenge? Frank cut in evenly. The grounds crew aren't laborers, they're where everything on paper becomes a real game. Grace's voice stayed steady. This isn't personal punishment. It's about rebuilding trust, learning the team from the grass, the base paths, the lights, and the bus schedules. She faced the room. For everyone else, tomorrow's work shifts, practices, and game schedules stay the same. Season tickets already sold will be honored, community programs continue. I'll hold a fan meeting Friday night in the main stands to answer all questions. Sponsors get a 60-day temporary extension. No fee increase, no location restrictions. We'll form a joint task force with the city to clear the stadium maintenance backlog. She paused, letting the quiet settle. Ethan leaned on the table. And if I sign neither? Martin answered crisply. Then the new board, appointed by ownership, will vote to remove you under the bylaws, and the audit file will go to the district attorney if criminal elements are found. Grace's tone softened, but not her resolve. You have 24 hours to decide. I want my son to choose the honorable path, but I will protect the Hawks even if I have to choose the hard one. Harper from the middle row leaned toward Ethan. The field's waiting to be mowed before practice this afternoon. If you choose to stay, we'll choose to stay too. A chuckle rose somewhere, not mockery but the first release after days of tension. Grace closed the meeting. The showdown at City Hall is over. From here it's work. If you're here for the team, for this town, stay. If you're here for Las Vegas, the door's right behind you. She gathered her case and stood. Ethan said nothing, just stared at the resignation and reassignment forms for a long moment, as if they were two white lines cutting across an entire season. Beyond the glass, the grass brightened in the sun. Everyone in the room understood. The balance of power had shifted, the first game was over, and the result of the second would begin with the decision Ethan would put to paper before the day was out. The next morning, as the 24-hour deadline Grace had given him expired, Ethan showed up at the stadium's side gate at 5:20 a.m., wearing a heavy jacket, faded jeans, and a pair of brand-new work boots. No meetings, no microphones, just a big thermos of coffee and a determined and reluctant look. Walt, the stadium operations manager, was waiting, offering only a curt, "Phone in the locker, time clock's over there, you're starting with the mower." No friendly handshake. Ethan nodded, set his phone aside, and rolled up his sleeves. The mower's engine roared in the foggy dawn, as Walt explained how to cut in alternating stripes for visual effect. Keep your pace steady, your lines straight. No one notices on paper, but out here everyone sees. Hands gripping the wheel, Ethan found it clumsy, heavier than any boardroom session he'd ever sat through. By the end of the first lap, sweat dotted his forehead despite the chill. After mowing, he was put on infield grooming duty, spreading calcined clay around the pitcher's mound and bases. Walt stood close, correcting his motion. Too soft and the pitcher slips, too hard and the ball takes bad hops. Find the balance. Ethan didn't answer, focusing on making the texture even. Harper appeared during practice, her glance slicing past him like a razor, saying nothing. By noon, blisters from the steel rake handle had bloomed in his palms. No one praised him, no one blamed him. Only work and more work. That afternoon, dragging a hose across the outfield, he caught a lip along the foul line, sending water spraying. A few players laughed until Frank's look shut them up. Harper walked by, eyes flicking to the puddle. Out here you mess up a small thing, the whole team pays. Fix it. Ethan bit his lip, quietly shoveling dirt to level the bump. That night at home, staring at the scratches on his hands, he realized he had never felt the weight of responsibility in something so seemingly small. In the following days, he learned to water each section enough to chalk the foul lines to the inch. He started asking Walt why each step mattered. Walt's answer stayed short. but less cold than on day one. One morning, Ethan suggested a 7:3 clay mix for the batter's box to hold its shape longer. Why 7:3? Walt asked. Because Harper rotates hard on her swing, she tears up more clay than average. This will hold through the 7th inning. Walt didn't praise, only said, "Do it." That afternoon after practice, Harper paused at the box, then said quietly, "Keep it like this for the series." It was not quite a compliment, but it was enough for Ethan to know he'd gotten it right. Tension between Ethan and Harper lingered. When he handed Walt a toolroom layout with color labels and QR codes for inventory, Harper caught sight of it and said coldly, "You're not CEO anymore. Don't turn the toolroom into a boardroom." Ethan replied evenly, "I gave it to Walt. If he says scrap it, I'll scrap it." Harper said nothing more, and Walt approved a trial in one corner days later. Frank only remarked when the tools were neatly arranged, "Easier to find a hammer now." Harper didn't comment, but Ethan noticed she came into practice earlier and was more focused. One Friday night, a storm hit mid-game, wind and rain slamming the field. Frank signaled, and Ethan joined the crew hauling the heavy tarp over the infield. Gusts ripped at the edges, two interns lost their grip, and Ethan dove for the flap, fingers numb. Harper raced from the dugout, grabbing a corner, shouting over the wind, "Don't go under the tarp." In that moment they moved like teammates. Once the tarp was secured, she looked at him and said, "Good work." In the days after, Ethan began arriving 30 minutes early to check sprinklers, patch the backstop netting, and replace bulbs in the grandstand lights. He didn't talk much, he just did the work. Harper started calling him Ethan instead of you in her directions. Around town there were still jokes at his expense, but also quiet nods and small gestures like Mrs. Harris slipping an extra pastry into his morning coffee order. Grace didn't interfere, only listen when Walt reported, "On time, works hard, learns quickly." At the month's end, Frank pointed at the calendar. Next weekend, Youth League Tournament, 6 U12 teams. Walt turned to Ethan. "You're in charge of the whole field and logistics. Chalk lines to Little League specs, prep the warm-up areas, water stations, entry points." Ethan wrote it all down: 60-foot base paths, 46-foot mounds, safety bases, posted rules. He pictured the kids' cheers as they crossed home and smiled. That night he texted Grace, "Need a few more volunteers for the water stations. The rest I can handle." No apology, just a short message. But Grace knew it meant her son was changing from the inside out. Saturday morning, the stadium parking lot was full before 7 a.m. The chatter of kids and the voices of parents giving last-minute reminders blending into a kind of excitement rarely seen in Redwood Springs. Ethan stood at the service gate with a checklist in hand: 60-foot base paths, 46-foot mound, and warm-up areas stocked with water and first aid kits. He had chalked the lines since 5 a.m., just as the sun edged over the grandstand. Walt made a slow circuit, giving a brief nod. Harper checked the mound, then glanced at him. "If it holds through the 5th inning, call me." Grace was busy with volunteers hanging the Redwood Youth Classic banner, occasionally watching her son, but never stepping in. At 8 o'clock, the national anthem floated from the speakers. A boy tossed the ceremonial first pitch, and the stands clapped as one. The opening game began, the smell of hot dogs and sunflower seeds drifting on the breeze. Midway through the 2nd inning, a parent said, "Hey, the water fountain's stuck." Ethan fixed it on the spot, then hustled back when Harper signaled the batter's box needed patching. By midday, the sun had blurred the foul lines, and Ethan re-chalked them in perfect straight runs. Harper said nothing but tapped the toe of her cleat against the dirt, a silent nod. On the secondary field, Frank and Harper ran pitching drills for the kids, while Ethan gathered balls, wiped them clean and passed them along. He realized he felt more at peace here than ever in the CEO's chair. By the semifinals, clouds had rolled in. Sensing rain, Ethan had the tarp ready and the equipment moved. The downpour came right on the half-inning change. He and the grounds crew hauled the tarp over the infield. Harper checked the surface, then waved the game on. When a pint-sized shortstop snagged a liner and doubled off a runner, the roar hit like surf, and Ethan saw the mound still intact. He let out a slow breath. In the final, Miners vs. Falcons, the score sat at 22 in the 7th. Falcons brought a small framed girl to pitch, prompting murmurs in the stands. First pitch, ball. Second strike. Then a grounder put a runner on base. Ethan noticed the batter's box edge dip slightly. During the ball swap, he patched it fast. In the next pitch, she threw a curve that made the batter swing over it, and then a fastball just off the edge, strikeout. The girl flung her glove into the air as her teammates swarmed her. Harper turned to Ethan with a rare smile. Nice patch job. The awards ceremony was simple. Plastic-coated medals, a small trophy, and team photos. Grace spoke briefly about John and the soon-to-launch Little League scholarship program. We're not just building a team, we're building a place where kids know they belong. She handed the girl a Hawks cap embroidered arquebus. The girl hugged it, murmuring thanks. Harper and Frank applauded, and Ethan slipped to the edge of the grandstand. A boy who'd once helped him mop mud ran up, pressing a small card into his hand that read, "Thank you, field team," and said thoughtfully, "You draw straight lines." Ethan laughed and tapped fists with him. Grace saw it, her gaze warming, not for publicity, but for something simpler. A child seeing this man as part of their field. By sunset, teams were filing out, trash neatly tucked into bins Ethan had set. He shut down the lights row by row, locked the equipment shed, and paused at the bulletin board where Grace had pinned a thank you note to the volunteers and the field crew. Harper passed by and handed him a water bottle. "Keep it, you've got work tomorrow." Ethan nodded, pulling a hand-drawn drainage plan and storage layout from his pocket, glancing toward the office where Grace's desk lamp still glowed. For the first time in months, he believed he might bring something better, not a deal but a field that knew how to breathe. Sunday afternoon, with the field quiet after the youth tournament, Ethan set a stack of papers bound with a rubber band on the conference table, hand-drawn diagrams and meticulous spreadsheets. Training facility improvement plan, 3 phases, low cost. Walt sat at the head, Harper leaned in the doorway, Frank twirled a pencil, and Grace sat one seat back, watching. Ethan spoke slowly. Phase 1, over 4 weeks, dig 3 drainage trenches parallel to the first and third baselines, replace 2 sprinkler heads, rebuild the bullpen mound, install steel pipe shelving in the equipment shed, 80% done in-house, 20% contracted, cost $8,400, $5,000 from local sponsorships, the rest from the maintenance fund. Goal: cut post-rain drying time by 1/3, save 20% on water, eliminate bullpen slips. Phase 2, reconfigure batting cages. Move the pitching machines, replace netting, install LED lights, post drill boards, cost $6,100, seeking in-kind sponsorship. Goal: boost off-peak usage by 25%. Phase 3, repair the warning track, add an ambulance ramp, paint directional lines, tie it to a Citizen Day for the Hawks event. Harper asked, "If a west wind pushes in rain, will narrow trenches drain fast enough?" Ethan answered instantly, "I measured during the semifinal, water flows toward the third base edge. I'll add a secondary trench to connect to the drain valve behind grandstand C. Pack the mound edge another 3%. Walt nodded, asking who'd weld the pipe. Ethan had already lined up a local welder. Frank asked how results would be measured. Ethan promised a game-by-game checklist, halting the project if benchmarks weren't met. Harper only said, "All right." Grace rested her hand on the edge of the plans, looking at her son's sun-browned face, fresh calluses, the stance of someone used to physical work. She said, "No titles, no press release. Do phase 1 for weeks. Budget advanced, community funds fill the gap. If it works, go to phase 2. If not, stop." Ethan nodded without pushing, asking, "Can I use Dad's old clipboard?" Second drawer. The meeting ended without handshakes. Harper tossed a pile of torn netting onto the table. "Measure the cut list tomorrow." Walt grumbled, "I hate narrow trenches, but this one's worth a try." Frank marked 3 checkpoints, day 1, day 14, and day 28. Ethan gathered his papers, paused at the door, meeting Grace's eyes, not forgiveness, not judgment, only opportunity paired with responsibility. The afternoon tilted over the grass, kids from yesterday's tournament still lingering to play plastic ball, their laughter drifting into the room. Ethan stepped outside, pinning a fresh notice to the bulletin board. Volunteers needed, Citizen Day for the Hawks. Bring shovels, hats, and water. Leave business cards at home. Up above, Grace watched her son measure the mound edge again. The 3% slope angle just right. She remembered something John once told her. Some things you must do with your hands before you can put them in a plan. Then she turned away, leaving the door ajar, to let the wind run through the training field, and to let an old ending slip out, making space for a new beginning. This isn't just the story of a baseball team. It's the story of a mother, Grace, who dared to stand against her son to protect what she believed was right. She didn't take the easy way out by staying silent or giving in. She chose the more challenging path, letting her son taste failure, face real challenges, and start again from the ground up. Her strength wasn't in shouting or in the authority of documents, but in her patience, resolve, and deep, unshakable love. Sometimes a mother's love isn't about holding you close and shielding you. It's about pushing you into the storm so you can find yourself again. And because of that, Ethan didn't just change how he saw the team, he came to understand the value of community and family legacy. And what about you? If you were in Grace's place, would you dare to do something your child might hate you for now, but thank you for later? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'd love your answers. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more stories, because who knows, the next one might make you think of someone special in your life.